Hi, thanks again for joining us today on Future Discussions podcast brought to you by TAFFDs. Today I will be discussing something that is really interesting. I wouldn't say very interesting to us because most of us are really afraid of it to some extent, I would say. And so it's about death. But today we're not going to be talking about death from the usual perspective of how we talk about it from with a dreaded sense. We'll be talking about it today from a slightly different perspective, and that is from the perspective about its alternative. And today we're here talking about cryonics. So you would wonder what is cryonics. So for those of you who don't understand what cryonics is, so cryonics is the practice of preserving life by pausing the dying process using subfreezing temperatures with the intent of restoring good health with medical technology in the future. And today I have an amazing man on the show who will be helping us understand what cryonics is all about. And he will be discussing cryonics and helping us understand how it can be implemented. And I'm here talking about Max More. He is a philosopher and a futurist who writes and speaks and consults on advanced decision making about emerging technologies. As at the time this video was recorded, Max More was still the CEO of Alcor Life Extension Foundation. But currently, he is the ambassador and president emeritus of the organization after serving 9 years in the organization. So it's a pleasure to have Max come on the show to talk about what cryonics is all about and how his organization has been working assiduously to bring the fruits of this technology to our society, to us, so that we can benefit from it. So Alcor Life Extension Foundation is the world leader in cryonics and cryonics research and cryonics technology. It is a non-profit organization located in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it was founded in 1972 to bring cryonics to the world. So I enjoy you to stay put and enjoy this conversation. It's a little bit different from our user presentation because it was recorded in 2019, not this year, 2021. But no worries, the information that Max shared in this video, they are quite still relevant for your consumption. So stay put and enjoy. So it's with great pleasure that I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Max More, to the Future Discussion podcast. I'm really pleased to have you on the show.
Thank you, Augustus. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, so you are the CEO of Alcor Life of Extension Foundation that deals mainly on cryonics. So just as a way of beginning, I would like to ask you, could you explain to us what you do at Alcor Life Extension Foundation?
What I do or what the organization does? Probably what the organization does.
What the organization does. Yeah.
Okay, so right. Well, Alcor, for short, has been around for 46 years, something like that, 47 years, I think now. Essentially, what we do, the way I think of it, is it's an extension of emergency medicine. So what we do is at the point of what's today considered legal death, in other words, basically where a doctor says, I don't know what else I can do for you. I'm going to give up and I'm going to call you dead, even though that's kind of an arbitrary line. And we could talk more about that later. We step in and say, well, don't just throw this person away. Don't just bury them or burn them. Send them over to us. We're going to stabilize them biologically. We're going to do our best to do as little damage as possible, lower them in temperature while protecting the cells against ice formation, and store them at minus 320 Fahrenheit or minus 196 Celsius, depending on what you use. And at that temperature, there's no change whatsoever. And we can wait for 50 years, 75 years, 100 years if necessary, until we develop the technology needed to reverse that process and to undo the damage that led to them being so-called dead by today's standards.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, that might seem like a radical idea, except if you go back. Sorry, go ahead.
Continue.
Yeah, so people say, well, that's kind of a crazy, wild idea. So I like to go back to, say, 1960, like half a century ago, and point out that people were called dead back then if they stopped breathing or if their heart stopped beating. We just check their vitals if they're dead. That was it. We gave up on them. Today, we don't consider them to be dead. Well, they're clinically dead, strictly speaking. They're not fully dead. we consider them in need of emergency medical intervention, and we do CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, defibrillation. There's all kinds of things we can do to recover them from what in 1960 we just said they're dead. And so our view is that when we say someone's dead today, what does that really mean? It really just means that the doctor today, with today's medicine and technology, doesn't know what else to do. Now, that doesn't mean 20 years from now, 50 years from now, things will be different, just as they are now compared to the past. So it doesn't, death is a complicated term, and I spent a quarter of my doctoral dissertation actually defining what really death is. There's clinical death, there's legal death, there's brain death, there's all these different kinds of death. So when you're called dead today, that's kind of an arbitrary thing. If you think about it, people couldn't donate living organs if everything died at once. Of course, it doesn't. They give kidneys, heart, livers, and so on. So most of them, they're mostly really alive. It really just means that today's medicine gives up. We don't give up. We kind of take the next stage. It's not promising anything's going to work because it relies on some speculation about future technologies, but we think those are fairly plausible and it's worth a shot. It's better than the alternative, at least.
Yeah, that's great. Do you focus only on cryonics, or do you have other side projects on areas of life extinction that you also focus on, or is it just on cryonics?
Well, Alcor as an organization is devoted solely to cryonics. It's complicated enough that we want to keep our focus there. Personally, I'm very interested in other areas of longevity and have been for many decades, and certainly do my best to avoid having to become a cryonics patient because it's not my first preference. I'd rather stay alive and healthy in the first place. But Alcor as an organization is just focused on cryonics.
Okay, that's okay. So could you briefly explain to us the science behind cryonics, exactly how it works, and why it is not just a crazy sci-fi movie idea?
Okay. Well, we have to divide up cryonics into different areas, I guess. So there's the future part, which is the part where we're going to repair and revive patients, and that's all more speculative. But for now, let me set that aside. So people say, well, you can't really expect these people to ever come back because they're dead. Dead is dead. Well, no, dead is not dead because, again, we've had people who are clinically dead for over an hour who have been revived. Usually people fall into freezing cold water or snow, and there are documented cases of people being clinically dead for over an hour, no heartbeat, no respiration, no brain activity, and yet they're brought back with no real damage. That's interesting. And then we have cases, there's actually a surgery researcher in the US who is proposing to take people with gunshot wounds and take them down to 10 degrees C, which is pretty cold, and do surgery on them. The idea being that at that temperature, your body metabolism slows down by 75%, so you have more time to operate, whereas otherwise it would not be feasible. We can also think, well, if you think about it, there are millions of people walking around today who were cryopreserved. It's just they were embryos at the time, right? In vitro fertilization, you have embryos sometimes born, like twins, often born years apart. You can keep them at liquid nitrogen temperature and they're fine. You can do that for corneas and heart valves, blood vessels, skin, a whole bunch of different tissues can be cryopreserved and revived. Now, getting from that single tissue to an organ like a heart, a lung, a brain is more difficult. The larger the mass and the more different the cells are, the more different. And for a whole body is really difficult. So the fact that we have not today been able to reverse a whole person from cryopreservation doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. It's a matter of time. We're working towards that. We're right on the edge today. The cutting edge of science basically is to be able to do whole human organ reversible cryopreservation. And I think this is going to happen in a few years. We'll be able to cryobank organs in a hospital. So if you need a new heart, a new liver, rather than hoping desperately that someone across the country might have the right tissue match and we can fly it in time to get there, they won't need to do that. They'll just take it out from storage and there you have it. We're very close to that. And thinking of the brain as an organ, well, it should be applicable to the brain too. So it's really kind of a plausibility argument, but it's not just that. We have some direct evidence that what we're doing does preserve the essential structures of the brain that make you who you are. Now, the best science that we have, according to memory and personality, is that everything except maybe something like 20 minutes of the past, that you're going to lose. If you go into surgery, get general anesthesia, you're going to lose 20 minutes of memories because they're all electrochemical activity. It's not stored long term. But anything longer than that changes the structure of the brain, the synaptic connections, and there's other changes. And we actually have electron micrograph studies that show under decent conditions, we are preserving those structures. So we actually have good reasons to believe that at least some of our patients, there's a huge variability in the conditions, some of our patients do have their memories. It's just a matter of, will we have the technology to reverse this sometime in the future? And my view is, well, it's a good bet that we probably will. When? I don't know. But it's like asking someone in 1900, when will we land someone on the moon? Well, how on earth could you figure that out? I mean, you got to build new rockets, life support systems, all kinds of stuff. But physically, it was possible. So the British Astronomer Royal in 1959, I think it was, said, space travel is impossible. He looked like an idiot 10 years later because it was done. He should have known better. So it's not, there's no laws of physics are being violated. We're not asking for backwards time travel or anything like that. We're simply talking about medical repair devices that get smaller and smaller and smaller over time and more sophisticated. And that's where we're headed. We're starting to regrow organs today. So it's not a sure thing, but we think given the alternative, and my view is nothing, just you're gone, this seems like a pretty good bet. And we make sure our members understand that there are no guarantees here. We're not promising that this is definitely going to work. It's a bet, and I think it's a very decent bet to make.
Yeah, probably if you have the chance of preserving yourself, of the chance of coming back to life in 0.1%, as against having a zero chance of not coming back to life, you're going to choose that of 0.1%. I think that's the bets that we're talking about here. So what are the
right. Although I think the odds are actually a lot higher than that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You have to explain that much better as we go along in the interview, because I have questions regarding that. What are the practical applications of cryonics today, and what are the potential improvements in the future, say a decade or two?
How can we do cryonics better in the next decade or so?
Yeah, the potential improvements, because at the moment we know that you use liquid nitrogen to preserve people, and there are some molecular damage that still happen. So what are the practical applications that you're doing today? And when you put it side by side, what are the potential improvements that we could witness in say a decade or two?
Well, it's hard to really forecast things that haven't happened yet, but we've already made massive improvements since the early days. Around the turn of the century, we introduced what's called vitrification. So people often say, what do you guys do? You freeze people, right? And, well, no, not really. In fact, we try to avoid freezing people because freezing implies the formation of ice crystals. And ice crystals do a tremendous amount of damage. They poke holes in cell membranes and damage the neurons.
Yeah.
That's not good. Now, it's not as bad as some people make it out. Some people make it out that the ice forms inside the cells and grows and kind of expands and blows them apart. And that's not what happens at all. But still, ice is bad. What they don't realize often is that we use, based on the latest organ cryopreservation research, we use a cryoprotectant, or if you like, a medical grade antifreeze. We use to replace the blood and other fluids. So that when we go below freezing, the freezing point, instead of forming ice crystals, essentially this substance just forms kind of a resinous block that holds everything in place. So it's not doing any damage. So that part is kind of hard to improve upon, except to say that there is a certain level of toxicity, chemical toxicity in that cryoprotectant. But it can't be that high because the researchers who created this formula have already brought back rabbit kidneys that have been vitrified. They've implanted them and they've functioned. So I don't think that's a big deal. I personally think the biggest improvements in the next decade will not be so much in the pure technology, it will be in our ability to respond quickly, which is critical because, if you think about it, if you're living alone at home, your heart gives out or something, nobody finds you for 2 days, you're in really bad shape. Yeah. And there's nothing we can do to reverse that. So that might be too much damage, it's hard to say. So one of the major things we're working on right now is basically an emergency alert system where you can wear some kind of device that will monitor your vital signs. And if your heart stops for too long, it'll basically call a bunch of people and let us know you're in trouble and where you are. That can make a huge difference for a number of people. That's good. Certain kinds of legislation that allow people to choose when they want to go, rather than suffering from Alzheimer's disease or dementia, where your brain maybe won't be recoverable. We're not really sure. That actually will be a bigger improvement. So it's not just the pure technology, it's the response technology, the response capabilities. But also, I think the ability, a very important thing for cryonics as a whole is the ability to demonstrate that this actually has a good chance of working. So for a number of years now, we've been doing CT scans of our patients, or our brain-only patients, so we can actually tell objectively whether or not we've managed to replace the blood and other fluids with this medical-grade antifreeze. And now we have, thanks to our generous donation, we have our own CT scanner, and we can go back and study all our patients that way. So I think the creation of more evidence that supports this idea is one of the biggest things. Just a couple of years ago, we did a study. It was the first time this had ever been done, in terms of taking a whole organism, even though it's a small one, and cryopreserving it and bringing it back and proving that it had its memory. Essentially, we took this little tiny little worm. It's very elegant. It's got this kind of nice curvaceous shape. It's called C. elegans. It's very well known in biology. And it's not that smart, but it can run very simple tasks. We basically used a chemical gradient to teach it where its food was. Is it over here or is it over there? And after training them, they were cryopreserved, held at cryogenic temperatures, brought back, and then tested. Because they're so tiny, you can rewarm them very rapidly, which is critical. And we can't do that to whole humans right now. But we were able to demonstrate not only did they come back to life, one of them even gave birth afterwards, but they also remembered the memory task. So that was kind of a first, proof of principle. Now, obviously, there's a long stage from a microscopic worm to a human being, but we're going to keep pushing those frontiers. And I think each study we have that kind of pushes that further will be a very major step for us.
Yeah, that's great. Your position at Alcor is that cryonics, and I quote, is a belief that no one is really dead until the information content in the brain is lost, and that low temperatures can prevent that loss. Now, the use of cryoprotectants and cryopreservants and the process of vitrification, which you use, could potentially, in the course of my research, I found out that it could potentially cause some damage to the structure of the preserved cells. And you would correct me if I'm wrong here. Yeah, so both in the general body and in the brain, particularly, most importantly, in the brain. Now, how minimal is this damage, and what possible ways are you devising to better preserve patients that could ensure zero damage to the cells?
That's a very good question, because our goal is really reversible suspended animation, just like you see in the movies where they, someone is on a space flight, they put them into something like cryopreservation, and they bring them back and they're completely undamaged. Now that's the goal, and we're always trying to move towards that. And as I mentioned earlier, the current cryoprotection we use does have some chemical toxicity. However, it doesn't seem to be that critical, given that they have recovered rabbit kidneys from this. Also, to me, what's kind of telling is that there's a paper actually about to be published on a human brain tissue that was taken from a special patient that shows that all the neural structures, all the synaptic connections, all the neural bodies that embody your memory, as far as we can tell from numerous ways of studying them, seem to be perfectly intact. So that's very encouraging to me, at least. And as a potential future cryonics patient, that's encouraging. However, one thing that maybe we can work on, and is being worked on, is with our current protocol, the brain will actually contract quite a lot. It will look like half the regular size. And people go, oh, that's scary. If you shrunk my brain, isn't that going to do some damage? Well, probably not. It's kind of like, you slightly dehydrated a fruit or something. It probably is not damaging the structures. And in fact, our electron micrograph studies suggest it's not. However, there are some ways around that. The problem is the blood-brain barrier kind of prevents certain chemicals getting into the brain. But there are a couple of active research projects underway now that may be able to prevent that kind of dehydration. It's actually a good thing in a way, because it's telling us that we're getting the water out of the brain, which is good. We want to get rid of the water that would freeze. But if we could actually prevent the brain from shrinking and take up more of the cryoprotectant, certainly it would look better, and potentially, it would be better. Although I don't really think it's doing damage today. It's hard to say exactly. So that will be one pretty important area, preventing shrinkage of the brain while still preventing any ice formation.
Okay, that's great. What percentage of hope do early patients stored with relatively crude method? For example, William Bedford, the foremost, the oldest patient in your facility, with compared to the science that we have today on cryonics, that's a lot more improved, as against what was used in preserving patients in the past.
Mhm.
What percentage of hope do these patients have for treatment and revival? And so does the chance of treatment and revival or resuscitation progressively reduce as we regressively go back to early patients, preserved with comparatively crude methods?
No, good question again. Yeah, that's kind of hard to answer. On average, I would say yes. The further you go back, the less advanced the methods were, the cruder they were, the more damage is likely to be done. However, that's kind of a general trend, and is not. You can't always say that's true, because today, with the best techniques we have today, if we don't find someone for a couple of days, they're going to be terribly damaged. Right? So it depends a lot on the conditions. In the case of Dr. James Bedford, as you mentioned, the first cryonaut, if I can call him that, from 1967, who Alcor inherited, because we didn't start till 1972. We still have Dr. Bedford. I'm sure he's very damaged because they attempted some kind of cryoprotection, but as I understand it, they didn't really get to circulate it, so there's probably not really any cryoprotection there. So he's going to have a lot of ice formation damage. Now, is that irreparable? I don't know. I really don't know. I think it might be repairable, but it's just it's a difficult problem in basically information theory as to, can you infer the state of the brain as it was from what remains? That's kind of a tricky problem. But yeah, in general, the earlier patients will not have received as good a treatment, especially, pre-1990s, even before vitrification from like 2000, 2002. Even before then, we were reaching pretty high concentrations of cryoprotectant and eliminating most ice. But if you go back, the late 60s, early 70s, probably in general, not so good. It also depends on the organization. Alcor is very keen to use the best possible procedures, even if it costs more. Some other organizations may just say, well, we don't, future will fix everything. We don't have to worry about that. Let's just do this nice, cheap and easy. Well, okay, if you want to take that option, you're welcome to, but we want to do as little damage as possible and keep you, put as little pressure on the future as possible, because we don't know where the limits lie. It's not going to be magic in the future. It's still technology. And if it's too broken, they may not be able to fix it. So let's do as little damage as we possibly can today.
Yeah, that's all right. I know you've said in the past that you focus mainly on cryonics and everything that's concerns, but since this also finds its scope within, it finds its place within cryonics, I would like to ask, do you do some work on revival of patients? Is there any research that's going on the revival of patients? And if so, what's the level of progress?
Well, nobody here at Alcor is expecting someone to come back from cryonics in the next few years or even the next decade or so. So it's not the highest priority. There is research going on. In a sense, there's research going on without us, because there are all kinds of people working on growing organs, for instance, which is obviously relevant if you're going to have to regenerate and replace organs, either because you're a whole body patient, who's in bad condition, or you're just a neuro patient. So that's already happening. We're already growing actually at least proto-organs, organoids out of stem cells, which is pretty amazing. And I think we're very close to growing whole human organs. So all of that stuff is going to happen regardless of cryonics. The whole field of regenerative medicine is also relevant, because, and this is a kind of important thing to mention, a lot of people think, well, why would I want to do cryonics? I'll come back as a 95-year-old. Well, no, that's not the idea at all. The whole point is we'll have such command over human biology that we will reset your aging clock. We'll bring you back as a young, functionally young person with all the experience you have, but with a young, youthful, vital body, and it won't age anymore. So a lot of people are working on that independently. Now, there is some research going on specifically for cellular repair technology, an area that is basically called medical nanotechnology. Now, some of that stuff I can't talk about because it's kind of, I'm under NDA and I can't talk about that. But if you look at, there's 2 volumes of a big book by Robert Freitas called Nanomedicine, and that's all about designs for incredibly tiny devices that go inside cells with an onboard map of what they should look like and could fix them. And people say, well, that's just crazy science fiction. Well, is it? Our body does that already. How do you think it works already? We have all these tiny little devices, cells, within machines within machines within machines. It's just a matter of learning how to do those on command according to our specifications. And in the last year, the Nobel Prize for Physics went to 3 guys who invented some basic nanomachines. So we're starting along that path. That's already beginning to happen. But that is kind of further away. So we're more focused on minimizing the damage we do today, protocols, being able to respond more capably, evaluating how well we're doing, and making sure the organization will survive. But as time goes on, there will be more focus on revival. And I should mention, actually, it's part of Alcor's mission statement. You can see it on the website. Very much, I mean, a number one priority is keep patients in cryopreservation, but also part of that is revival and rehabilitation. You know, we're not going to, assuming this works, we're not going to bring you back and say, "Hi, welcome back, good luck," and push you out the door. That's not what we're going to do.
Yeah.
You need some time to catch up. Like, you know, if you've been in a coma for 30 years, which happens, people wake up. You need to be brought up to speed and rehabilitated. So that's part of our mission. And we've designed our funding so that if we manage the money well, that money should exist to help cover that in the future.
Yeah, that's great. I know you've tried to shy away or move away from giving any specifics on time frame as to when these things are going to happen, but as someone who is in the field, as someone who has a lot of experience and you've researching in this area, you probably have some information about what I'm about to ask. How is the process of revival going to look like, and what's time frame are we looking at with the current technology, with the way we are going? Are we looking at a decade or two? I don't want to put you on the spot, but you can just give us a picture.
It's impossible to answer, really. I mean, everybody asks this question. It's really impossible to answer because it just depends on too many unknowns. Again, you know, it's like asking someone in 1900 when we will land on the moon. Well, how would you even start to figure that out? It's not like asking how much will microchips cost in 4 years. We can do kind of a nice extrapolation. It just depends on too many things. So I can give you a couple of different answers, which might not be totally satisfying, but they're honest answers at least. One is there is not going to be one date on where everybody is brought back. It's not going to be some kind of religious revival thing.
Sure, yeah.
People who are very damaged may never come back, or they may take a lot longer till we have more advanced technology. People who are preserved maybe the most recently under the best conditions might be brought back relatively quickly. So maybe 20, 30 years from now, those people might be brought back quite soon, within a few years or a couple of decades.
Okay.
But okay, you want something a bit more than that. Okay, where do you think a whole bunch of people might start coming back? Again, with a huge uncertainty, I've got to make that declaration because we don't know. I would be very surprised if it was less than 30 or 40 years, and I'd be fairly surprised if it was more than 100. So there's a big uncertainty interval between 40. Now, some of our members are pretty optimistic. For instance, Ray Kurzweil, who's the chief engineer at Google, and is a public Alcor member, because he believes there will be a singularity. Basically, artificial intelligence will become super intelligent by, I think, 2035, 2040, and being super intelligent can solve our problems incredibly quickly. So he's on the very optimistic side of things. Presumably those problems would include how do you repair, a human body and so on. So in his view, maybe, people will be coming back by 2045, 2050. I'm not as optimistic as that. So I'm guessing, somewhere in the late 21st century, maybe, for many of us.
Yeah.
But again, it's really kind of a guess. I don't want to put much confidence in there.
Yeah, that's okay.
A lot of it depends. I should make the point. A lot of it depends on how much we make it happen, right? I mean, I used the landing on the moon example, which is a good one in this case, because in 1961, when the president said we're going to put someone on the moon, well, a lot of people thought that was kind of, how are we going to do that before the end of the decade? That's how. Okay, but we were driven. The USA was driven by competition with the Soviet Union. We had to beat the Soviets, right? So it was a really strong focus. A lot of money went into that, a lot of focus, and it happened, which is pretty incredible. Now imagine if we had the same amount of effort going into reversing the aging process, repairing biology, reversing damage from cryopreservation. That would change a lot of things. If it just happens as a byproduct of other technologies, it would take longer. So that's why there isn't really a correct answer. It just depends on a lot of things.
Yeah, more like a concerted effort towards that. So let me take you into a little bit of a movie scene here. So where I would like to paint a picture, a mental picture of what it will look like. And for the sake of our audience, what will the process of revival actually look like, and for the patients, and how sure are we that the patients we will be resurrecting will not be zombies?
Well, I can guarantee there won't be zombies because zombies go around trying to eat brains and that kind of thing. I see no reason why that would happen. The worst case scenario is that you could bring back a body that was alive, just like someone today who's brain dead, and they would have no memories or thoughts. Now, I think already today we'd have a pretty good idea, but I think by then we would know if that was going to be the case. We wouldn't bring someone back in that state. We're not going to try and bring back humans until we brought back cats and dogs and horses and lots of other creatures, right? So we're just not going to do that. We already have a pretty good idea what the basis of memory is, and by then we'll have an even better, more solid idea. So you're not going to bring back someone where the memories are not there sufficiently. There's some tricky questions about what if you're 80% intact, but 20% has been lost. In my view is I still want to come back, even if I lose 20% of my memories. Kind of depends which 20% too. I still want to come back. I mean, I don't remember most things that I've remembered from my life anyway. I have a terrible memory. I still want to wake up tomorrow. Now, what would it look like? Well, technologically, again, that's kind of really hard to say because it's basically asking me to describe technologies that don't exist yet. So kind of like asking the Wright brothers when they flew in 1903 to describe how a space rocket would work, and they were going to answer that question. Yeah. Just like Leonardo da Vinci drew all these diagrams of flying machines and other devices, which he couldn't build at the time, but they actually were pretty much workable. Most of them would actually work, but he didn't have the tools or the materials to make those things work. So all I can say is I think this will work. I don't know exactly how it will be done. It may involve some kind of molecular nanotechnology. Maybe for some people it won't require that much. But what I think will happen is basically you're not going to be allowed to come to consciousness until we've completely regenerated you. So I think your brain will be kind of kept at a non-functioning level until we know that everything is okay, and then you'd be brought to consciousness. And I think it'd be kind of interesting experience. I don't know if you or your viewers might have seen this movie, which is based on a classic book called Awakenings with Robert De Niro and Robert Williams, and it was based on a true story of people who have basically been like living statues for months or years, some for decades, and they weren't really aware of the passage of time or anything. And then someone invented L-Dopa to raise dopamine levels in the brain, and they were given this, it's probably like in the 50s, early 60s, and they kind of woke up, many of them. And imagine the experience if you've been like that for 30 years, looking in the mirror, you go, oh my God, I've aged 30 years overnight. Yeah. Well, in the cryonics process, it's kind of the opposite. I think, if you're 95 years old, you're cryopreserved, and you say, can I look at myself in the mirror? Oh man, I look great. The upside is you'll have all that knowledge. If it's done right, you'll have all the knowledge and experience related, but you'll be back in the body of your best self, probably even better than your best self. Yeah. So I think it'd be a good experience. I also suspect that maybe I talk about rehabilitation being necessary. I suspect that some of that might be done in virtual reality, where you can't really hurt yourself. Imagine walking in front of the flying cars or whatever. So maybe you have kind of a virtual training room first of all. It's very hard to specify that with any confidence exactly.
For patients who opted to have only their heads preserved, example, you signed up for that from the interviews I've seen you. What are the possible ways of bringing them back to life and full consciousness with their personalities intact?
Well, I think the personalities intact part applies both to neuro patients and whole body patients. There's not really a difference there. So I think the main concern with neuro patients is you don't want to come back just as a head, right? Well, obviously not. So to me, that's kind of it's kind of hard to convey to people generally, because we're talking about a time when you have such mastery of human biology that you can grow organs, you can grow body parts, you can regenerate things. If you have that kind of capability, and you can control the aging process. So at that point, to me, it seems pretty trivial to regrow a body. We know that certain animals can grow whole body parts or even half their body. We know actually humans can regrow stuff. When the embryos, we kind of lose that ability as we get older. Apart from our liver, which we can regrow little bits of, we're terrible at regenerating stuff. We're terrible at it compared to other animals. You can chop off maybe the very tip of your finger, you might grow that back, and that's about it. But that's a matter of learning the genetic switches and learning how to change those. So we're already researching the ability to grow organs and body parts. So you could take someone's own cells, or stem cells or whatever, grow their organs out of them, so you don't have to get a tissue match. So if we can do that, I don't see any particular reason why we couldn't support a brain in this appropriate medium and basically instruct the cells, the bodies, to de-differentiate, grow, and differentiate into the right body parts and grow you. Your body is going to be genetically your body, but it'll be fresh and young. Presumably, we want to, have it the right kind of age, and maybe accelerate to 20 years old or whatever. Now, some people say, well, wouldn't you just clone the body and transplant the brain? Well, I guess you could do that. You probably have to make sure that the clone didn't have a brain, so nobody's going to worry about ethical issues, even if there's nothing in the brain. But I think it's pretty more simple that we'll just basically grow a new body around us, including the face. You don't want your old face on your 90-year-old face on a 20-year-old boy. You don't want that. So you're going to have to regenerate everything anyway, except for the brain. Obviously, you can't replace the brain cells. You can replace the components of them, I guess. So that's really how I see it happening. It's basically going to support the brain and grow a body from it using advanced regenerative medicine.
Yeah, a lot of this sounds...
There are other possibilities. I mean, there are other speculative possibilities. There could be android bodies that are amazingly good. There could be people being uploaded, but those are all more speculative even.
Yeah, a lot of this sounds a little bit more like movie-like, and it's very hard for people of this time to really believe what you're to get the heads around what you're saying, because with the current technology we have today, we find it very hard to cure cancer, to take care of Alzheimer's, to make even some people die in the case of a heart transplant. So you're telling people that you're going to regenerate organs, grow body around brain and all of that. You can understand how difficult it is for someone today to really understand some of these concepts and how you're putting in. They'll be like, you're too much hopeful for these kind of technologies.
Right, it'd be like curing polio or measles. Oh, wait, we did that. Yeah. Oh, man, we did that. We wiped out polio and measles and a bunch of other things. Wow, okay. So it's always easy to say, oh, that's just not possible. But unless you can show some physical reason why it's not possible, I'm saying eventually this is a technical problem we're going to solve, and we are heading in that direction. Yeah. And a lot of common health problems are really not due to lack of technology. They're due to people's bad habits and bad institutions and bad policies, including the fact that we have measles coming back, which is completely unnecessary since we solved that problem. I would just point out the fact that we're already growing skin and a bunch of other tissues, and we're starting to grow organs today. I mean, right today. Don't have a book, take my word for it. Go and do a search in the literature. You find we're starting to do that today. It's not advanced yet, but we're heading in that direction. So I'm just extrapolating from there. And to me, because I've lived this for so long and I've thought about it for so long and I've seen the research, it's like, well, duh, it's obviously going to happen unless there's a catastrophe. But yeah, I understand that a lot of people will see where we are today. Like, they can't even cure my cold. How are they going to grow a body? Yeah, I can see that. But, amazing things happen over time. And we can already fix a lot of things today that people wouldn't believe in the past. Cochlear implants, so people can hear again. Brain implants to stop people having seizures. I mean, there's so many things we do today that it's funny, we take things for granted. Once they've been around for a few years, we just take them for granted and we're not impressed by them. When you take like today's mobile phone, you try and explain that to someone from 1950 or 60 or 70 even. Okay, I got this supercomputer in this little tiny box here that can do thousands of different things. I can talk to people across the world. It does all this stuff. They're going to think you're crazy. It sounds like way more advanced than Star Trek, but we did that, right? So,
yeah.
Biological sciences are tougher. There's no question about it. They're very complex systems, but we are making advances. And because I'm hopeful that we'll actually solve the aging problem before I get too old. I'm 55 now, and I'd rather not be cryopreserved. I'd rather stay, alive and walking around and control my destiny. But that's my backup option. Yeah. But I think people they tend to overestimate progress in the short term and underestimate in the long term, I think.
Yeah, part of the solutions that you have for neuro patients, those who have had their heads preserved only, is that there is the possibility of mind uploading that you the one you hinted about, and have them put maybe in a computer system or in an Android body or something, something like that. So how much faith do you have? How much faith do you have at Alcor on the science and technology of this mind upload, and how viable is it bringing back patients who have been preserved this way?
Oh boy, well, I can answer that question from my own point of view or from Alcor's point of view, which is not necessarily exactly the same, because Alcor has a collection of very smart people who differ quite widely on this topic. So there are some who would actually not regard uploading as a way of surviving at all. They philosophically would think that was not them, it was a new being, and that doesn't really help them. Others think that not only might it be possible to upload a mind, essentially, but that would be you, or it would be as good as you continuing. Now, I'm actually in the latter camp. I actually do think that a mind that was running on a different hardware platform, if it was a good continuation of mine, would be just as good as me surviving in a biological brain. There's all kinds of in-between thought experiments. What if you replace one neuron at a time until you've replaced 80 billion neurons, and I'm finally all made of silicon? At what point do I cease to be me? Well, I don't think there is a point. So there's a lot of arguments you can have about that. But at Alcor, we kind of take the conservative view that unless you tell us otherwise, like in your paperwork, we're going to assume that we're going to bring you back in your body, in your biological body. Even if we just preserve your brain, we're going to grow your biological body that's based on your genetic code. Now, we don't know. There may be android bodies, there might be uploading, might be possible. And there are some people who think that uploading might happen before we can revive cryonics patients biologically. I know those people well. So when people join Alcor, they can put in various preferences and options, like don't bring me back until you can bring back my spouse or my child or whatever. And we'll do our best to observe that. They can also say, do not ever, ever bring me back as an uploaded person. That's not me. Or they can say, I'll leave it up to the experts at the time. So you can express those wishes. So I personally would be okay with coming back on a different platform. I think that would still be me, but not everybody sees it that way. And that just kind of adds another level of complexity to cryonics. So we kind of stick to the base scenario that you're going to come back in your own biological body. Now, there may be stuff beyond that, but that just makes things more complicated, more difficult to believe, basically.
Yeah. What are the major psychological blockades preventing people, from your perspective, that are preventing people from supporting this cause? And even preventing people from even signing up for the process? Yeah.
No, that's a huge issue, actually. It's a huge question for me, because I'm always trying to think about why haven't more people signed up for this? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I always think, we'll look back from the future to the past to the present, and we'll think, what was wrong with these people? Were they insane? They were burying people in the ground to be eaten by worms and bacteria. They were incinerating them. Were they crazy? They couldn't preserve them. I mean, we'll look back and just be baffled, as we are habits of the past today.
Yeah.
So what is the problem? Well, obviously part of it is lack of information. People just don't know much about it. They've maybe seen something science fictional, they've heard something, it sounds strange to them. But there are actually people who know enough about it who still don't like the idea for various reasons. And I think there's a few factors here. One of them is a temporary factor that will go away eventually, which is basically the desire to be liked by other people and not to weird other people out. Like, what will my friends and family think? That factor.
Yeah.
As long as cryonics is seen as a fringe idea or something strange, you're going to worry, what will my girlfriend think, what will my parents think? A lot of people worry about that, just like people coming out as gay. Like, for a long time, that was, I couldn't do that because my dad's going to kick my ass and I'll get thrown out, get beaten up at school. Now that's kind of become less significant, and there's more support. So it's a little bit coming out as a cryonicist in a way. So that's part of it. I think another actually major part is, and I've heard this from so many people when I talk to them, they are frightened that it will work, which seems weird to me, but they're frightened that it will work because they say, I'll come out to a future where my skills are obsolete, I won't know anybody, it'll be such a different world, that's so scary, I'd rather just die.
Wow.
And I'm just kind of scratching my head at that. Really?
That's very negative-minded.
Really? Like, what a coward. How pathetic is that? Have some courage, jeez. I mean, look, I'm only half joking here. I made the move from England to Southern California back in the 80s. And it was a pretty big change. People were driving on the wrong side of the road. There's this bright object called the sun in the sky, which I hadn't seen very often. Didn't know many people, very different in many ways. It was fine. It takes a bit of training. There are some people, Aboriginal Australians, who've moved to like New York City. How much of a bigger jump could that be? And they've managed to cope with some help. So my view is that it's not worth dying because you're afraid that what the future might be or might be different. And if you're afraid of being alone, bring people with you. Get to know people who are signed up for this. Persuade your family and friends to come with you. because one day it will be the normal thing. And you look like an idiot if you don't try to, to help your friends. So there's a couple of factors. I think a third factor that's actually probably quite important. It's hard to know exactly because people say one thing, they don't necessarily really mean that as the reason. It's hard to tell. But I think a third factor is that a lot of people have a very negative view of the future. They think the future is going to be a bad place because why? Because all the science fiction movies I've seen or TV shows, it always looks like a bad place, pretty much. There's a few exceptions. The movie Her was actually not a bad exception, but almost always. But that's fiction. You have to have drama and conflict in fiction. You want to have humans being hunted and exterminated by robots, right? You got to have that kind of stuff, otherwise it's not fun. That doesn't mean that's plausible. Now, how do we have an idea what the future will really be like? Well, I suggest the best way of figuring that out is let's look at a whole course of human history. And what do we see? Well, it's ups and downs, but the long run trend is we live longer, we're healthier, we're wealthier, we're better off.
Yeah.
On every metric, human life has gotten better over time, even levels of violence, which people don't believe because they read all the worst news from the entire planet right in their face every day. But objectively, violence is going down. Things are getting better over time. So I'm not saying it's going to be utopia, but I'm fairly confident that if I'm brought back, we have the technology and the will that this will be a pretty good society. It'd be good enough that I want to live. But that's kind of a logical argument, and most people approach this very emotionally. There's a good example. When I was working on my doctorate in philosophy, which actually involved a lot of these issues, my advisor, who was a very smart philosopher, educated at MIT, one of the technical philosophers, was completely on board with my theory of mind and what I thought of who you are as a person, and yet she didn't like cryonics at all. And I asked her, well, I won't say her name, but why are you so against it? And she said she didn't give it. It was so hilarious because she was so smart and so trained in logic. Her answer was, well, it's just ghastly. And how do you argue against that? It was just some kind of like visceral emotional response that it's kind of hard to argue with that. That's obviously fed by a lot of reading or experience. I don't know where that comes from, but I would say, like today, I would say, you mean more ghastly than being stuck in the ground and eaten by worms and bacteria and decomposing? Is that really less ghastly?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's baffling.
Yeah. So the next question is a little bit like the one you just finished answering. What are the major misconceptions and misrepresentations that you usually get from the media and the general public about cryonics?
Well,
and how do you think it can be solved? Yeah.
Well, one of them, some of them mostly by just education. So one of the common misconceptions that we hear a lot, actually from people who should know better, talking about you, Michio Kaku. He's a popular physicist who on YouTube. You probably see a rebuttal to him.
I also saw your response to his this criticism. Yeah.
Right. We've heard that a lot. So he basically repeated what he'd heard to bother to actually check the literature. So he said that this can't possibly work because ice will form inside the cells and expand as it cools and basically blow it all up. And that's all what happens. I mean, he should have thought for a second, how is it that we can cryopreserve eggs and sperm and embryos and skin and corneas and they haven't blown up the cells? I mean, he should have at least had that thought that maybe I should look into this further. So it's amazing to me. So no, it's not true that ice blows up cells, even if we don't do the cryoprotection that we do whenever we can. I don't know, misconceptions. I guess one of the common ones is, this always amuses me, like we haven't figured this out after over 45 years. They say, what if the power goes out? You guys are so screwed. Really? Oh, thanks. We hadn't thought of that in half a century. So I guess it's important to emphasize that patient storage systems, they're basically in very large containers. Use the term thermos there, a thermos flask for keeping your drink hot or cold.
Yeah. It's
basically a very large thermos flask. It's like 11 feet tall, has a vacuum layer. No electricity is used to maintain the temperature. Basically, we top it off with liquid nitrogen once a week. That's more often than we need to do it. And that gradually evaporates at minus 320 Fahrenheit or minus 196 Celsius. And we just top it off occasionally. No power is used at all. It's a very passive, very reliable containment system. So, if the power goes out, it doesn't matter. We lose the air conditioning, we get sweaty in our offices, our patients are just fine. We do have a big backup generator because for the surgery room, when we're doing the surgical part of the procedure, obviously we have to have the power, but it doesn't affect the patients whatsoever. So it's amazing how how common that one comes up still. Along with the other one, you guys have Walt Disney, don't you? No. It would have been appropriate, but no. I'm not sure where that came from.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess the other thing is, this is just a get-rich-quick scheme, right? Really? They should actually come and try run a Cryonics organization. I think there are thousands and thousands of ways to get richer much quicker and much easier. Cryonics has been around for decades. It's still pretty small. It's growing slowly. Alcor is a non-profit organization. Our directors work many hours without any pay. I get paid, of course, as an employee these days for the last 8 years. I've been a member for over 30 years, not being paid. So it's a pretty lousy get-rich-quick scheme. It's happening very slowly and not getting very rich. So that's, if people actually take that seriously, they can look at our finances, they can look at how things run, and they can see that's just not plausible at all. That's kind of a quick toss away, not really going to argue kind of line. Yeah. So those are some of the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, we hope that with time that people would come to understand these properly and not take it out of context, as the case may be. So let's talk about the funding, the support that you're getting currently. Do you think it's enough, and how far can you get? Considering the indefinite time frame, or considering the uncertainty that surrounds the indefinite time frame for possible revival of patients. So how far can you get along with the current funding that you're getting now?
Well, there's different ways of taking that question. So part of it seemed to be about how do we maintain patients indefinitely, and part of it might be how do we continue operation. So we actually separate our finances very strictly at Alcor, and we're probably unique in that. So everyday operations are funded by membership dues, donations. Some people leave something in their will. We have an endowment fund that's still fairly modest. That pays for current operations, but for maintaining patients in cryopreservation, eventually bringing them back, we have a very strict financial system for that. We calculate how much we should charge for that part of the procedure for the long-term storage, which is currently the minimum, I think, $115,000 for whole body and $25,000 for neuro patients, to go to the Patient Care Trust Fund, or actually now it's the Alcor Trust Fund. It's actually a legally separate body that holds that money. So if Alcor is ever destroyed by a lawsuit or regulation, that the patient care will still exist separately from us, and that has by far the largest amount of money. And we basically have set that amount so that it should never, ever run out. There's a hard rule that you never draw more than 2% a year for expenses, because imagine you have like a Japan stock market situation where the markets don't go up for a long time and they don't move the money to other countries. You could run out of money. So we set it very conservatively. People will say for retirement, you can take 4 or 5% out. We take out no more than 2% at the most. So the idea is actually we should never take out that much. And over time, that money should actually grow. And the beautiful thing about cryonics is if it does take a long time, the more money you'll have, because over time, compounding gets quite impressive over time.
Yeah.
If you're just going to take 100 years, well, let's say you can maybe get, on a very conservative return, on average, say 3% above inflation. That's not a whole huge amount. So how long would it take to double your money? Well, the 3% takes about 24 years, because it's not a high return. If it takes 100 years, you've got about 4 times that, 24 doublings. So you're going to double it again, double again, double again. So you go 2, 4, 8, 16. So you start with $100,000, you end up with 1.6 million in today's money.
Wow.
So that's going to pay for a lot of revival, a lot of rehabilitation. In addition, it's now possible to, as a non-profit organization, we can't separate the patient care money per individual. It's just a common pool. But members can individually set up their own trusts so that when assuming they come back, they'll get their money back, so they can fund it with their estate. Now, until now, you had to have at least $500,000 to make that work. Otherwise, the corporate trustees weren't interested in doing that. It's not worth it. But we've now found a way of creating these group trusts called future income trusts, where you can buy in for a pretty modest amount, for us who are not millionaires. And that means that one of those worries about the future, I'll come back with no money, maybe you won't need money, we don't know. But we can now actually address that. And that's something that we're pretty much finalizing legally right now, basically a group future income trust. So I think, we talk about technology improvements. I think there's kind of legal institutional improvements also matter, because it reassures people that they all have something, assuming the robots aren't providing everything free, which is possible.
Yeah. So talking about legal improvements and everything that concerns that, let's talk a little bit about some obvious legal ramifications to this, at least from today's legal operative understanding. Starting with the fact that the person that the person has already been declared legally dead. How would you, or how could the law reinstate them? How could a person reclaim their assets that they've owned in life, but had them passed to family members on death? How could inheritance laws be undone? How could, if a person's spouse is still alive, but has now remarried, what would the marriage be like? Would it still be valid when the former partner returns from dead? Even before that happens, or this happens, what is the status of the corpse during its, or the patient during its time in the deep freeze? Does it have any legal rights or that? So, could you help us clarify a little some of these ramifications? Yeah,
a whole bunch of questions there. So yeah, so as things exist today, our patients, we call them patients and we think of them as patients, but in the eyes of the law, they're just things. They're just biological donations. Basically, we use the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, the same thing used to donate organs. Basically, people are illegally donating their biological samples to us, basically. So that's how things are today. I think there will come a time as this advances and people become more aware of it and its chances. I think eventually our patients will be accorded a different legal status, something more like someone who's in a coma. Someone who's in a coma for years, you can't just go cut off their limb. You can't just chop off their arm or pull off a toe or something like that. That's not legal. So I think eventually they'll get the same kind of status. Obviously, they're not able to sign contracts and so on, but they have rights. So that's part of it. You asked some very tricky questions, which I can't really answer satisfactorily, about what if you've remarried? Will you be the same person? Have the Social Security number? What about life insurance? Well, there's a simple answer and there's a kind of a more complicated answer to that. The simple answer is we've already had experience with this. There is case law, probably in every country, certainly in any kind of advanced country, where people have been assumed to be dead. They've gone missing, presumed dead, lost at sea or whatever, not heard from, got amnesia, if you watch too many TV episodes or whatever. People have just disappeared. They've been declared legally dead, their Social Security number cancelled, they're gone. And then years later they appear again, and they have to kind of demonstrate that they're the same person. Now, they may not be able to get all their assets back if they've been distributed, but they can get their legal identity back. Now, of course, in cryonics, it's a little bit more extreme in that there could be decades gone, which is probably not usually the case in this situation. So there's two different approaches. You can either say that it's the same person legally, obviously philosophically is one thing, but legally, or you can decide that you have a new identity. Now, interestingly, our attorney, the expert trust attorney who's been working on what I was just describing, this future income trust that's more affordable, he actually thinks the better option is to have a new legal identity for exactly the reasons that you brought up. You're very good questions. Yeah, what about the insurance company? Will they try and get their money back for the life insurance because you're not dead anymore? Well, that would not really be reasonable because you died at the usual expected time. What about past marriages? Those are all complex questions. So, and I don't have all the answers to them yet because obviously those are to be developed. Yeah. But I was just assuming it'd be more like reclaiming your identity, but maybe he's right. Maybe it's better to have basically a new legal identity, even though you're psychologically the same person, it's continuity. Those are actually kind of quite tricky questions that we haven't worked out in any real detail yet. It's something we're working on actually right now.
Okay.
And it's going to take a while for the law to catch up, of course, before that can even be tested in any kind of case law. But one area that I think might be worth mentioning, and I probably couldn't have mentioned this until very recently, now we have a case report published on this, and an article in Gizmodo magazine just a couple of days ago. We have, for the first time, been able to take advantage of the death with dignity laws. Go by various different names: physician-assisted suicide, death with dignity. Basically, in California, a few months ago, we had a case where a member was terminal, and he said, California has now made it legal to have physician-assisted suicide or death with dignity. And I want to go, actually, he called us up on a Monday and said, I want to go on Wednesday. And we said, whoa, slow down there, buddy. we can't do it. We've never done this before. 2 days is not enough notice, so you gotta slow down a little bit. But we were able to do that, and the advantage to that, whatever moral judgment we have about those laws, the advantage for cryonics obviously is that you can plan exactly when you're going to go, rather than heart failing when you're hiking up a mountain or whatever. You can say, I want to go on April 14th at 2 p.m. That's when I'm going to take my end-of-life medications. We can have a team standing by, and we can start immediately with no delay, with no complications, and everything can be optimized. So that law is actually very helpful for us, and that exists in several states in the US now, and of course in some European countries and Canada, and it seems to be a spreading phenomenon. So whatever one might think about that morally, and I personally have no problem with it, it certainly is helpful from a cryonics point of view.
Yeah, it's helpful from the cryonics point of view, but it's of course it will raise a whole lot of questions with the question of euthanasia and all of that. And what if there was a potential cure for the person's illness within minutes or seconds before the person's death? Chances to that, but these are questions that could be answered another day. It's all right. On this show, I usually ask my guests because the show is generally about emerging technologies, the scope and scale, and how we can leverage upon them. So what other emerging technologies do you think will have the most profound effect on us and our world, apart from cryonics?
Well, I wouldn't call cryonics a technology as such. It's more of a procedure that involves various technologies. Okay. Well, I think that nanotechnology, which is a very broad term, but I really mean, as Eric Drexler described it back in his 1986 book, Engines of Creation, the kind of nanotechnology that just doesn't mean nanomaterials. Nano really means 1/1000th of a meter, so these incredibly tiny devices. If you could make devices to order to do what you want them to do, that would change pretty much everything. We could not only rebuild our bodies from the cells inside, you can make large structures out of diamonds. So you can imagine skyscrapers miles tall. You could build aircraft out of things that are very much lighter. I mean, read Drexler's book, you can see what's possible. If you can arrange atoms exactly the way you want, you can do an amazing amount of stuff. So that, I think, we're starting to see that very gradually starting to happen. Apart from that, I think we have to say, well, life extension technologies in general, and that's not, again, one technology. There are a few interesting things that seem to be having some promise right now that encourages me. But another big area, I think, has to be artificial intelligence. And this is something that people have been talking about for decades, and it never quite gets there. But a lot of people think we're kind of at the point where it's getting to be really interesting, and we should start really being concerned about it, like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, actually worrying about this stuff and making sure that AI will be friendly to us and so on. I think it's going to take a while before it reaches human level intelligence, let alone superhuman level. But that is going to be one of the most profound technologies. And my own preferred path for that is that we kind of integrate with AI. It's not going to be humans versus AI, which is the fictional version that causes the conflict. I think more likely we'll kind of integrate with it fairly much and enhance ourselves. But that's probably going to be one of the most profound technologies of the near future. And there's probably other stuff that we haven't even thought of yet, because that's the way it always is, right? I think nobody's thought of yet. Something will be incredibly important to us.
Yeah, and all of these are going to be converging in different ways, in even helping the process of revival of patients in cryonics even much faster. I think, yeah.
But let's say one kind of, and it's again not really a technology, it's more of an application of several possible technologies, would be an advanced neurotechnology, a way of understanding even better what's going on in the brain and being able to re-engineer the brain's pathways. And instead of taking like antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, what if you could actually change the brain so you're just like someone who never had anxiety or depression? And what if you could rewire it so you could actually understand your emotional centers better, understand why am I feeling so unhappy about something? Because we don't really understand that very well. We're not built to.
Yeah.
I think we become maybe a lot more sympathetic, empathetic, understanding ourselves and others better. It's in some way kind of better than human. We could be more understanding of ourselves and other people, because we're not very good at that right now. We're just evolved to basically survive under pretty simple conditions.
Yeah. And even where Kozwai talked about with the completion of the reverse engineering of the human brain, it could be a lot more better for us to really understand what is happening in our brains at the level of at the cellular level. And so with that coming into place, if we are able to achieve the complete reverse engineering of human brain, to go a lot better in also helping what you're doing, especially for the neuro patients.
Yeah, well, understanding, well, if you can duplicate it, I guess it depends on how you do that. Does that mean regrowing biologically, which might be one option using the growth factor or some other approach? Or you could maybe have the approach of people like Ted Berger at USC, who I interviewed decades ago, and I talked to not long ago. He's been building basically synthetic neurons. So his goal was, for instance, take someone with damage to the motor cortex of the brain. They can no longer control their limbs. He's building synthetic neurons that can directly interface with biological neurons, and you can learn, train them, and get those functions back. So that stuff is actually going on. It's been pretty slow progress, but they are making progress.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So how can people support the work you're doing?
Well, the best thing is to support themselves, is become a member, make the arrangements. Go to Alcor's website at alcor.org, look at the membership page, call our membership administrator, become a member, because you never know when you might need this. You always think, oh, I'm fine, I'm going to be fine. And then we have things happen to them. So just being a member helps us. Certainly anybody out there who wants to contribute and donate, we recently had a very generous research donation, unprecedented in size, and that's enabled us to do our own CT scanning and a lot of other work that we couldn't afford to do before. We're still a pretty small organization, so just being involved, your expertise. But my first thing, save your own life first. It's like when you're on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first. Yeah. So the first thing I say is, if you think this is plausible, become a member first of all, and then see what else you might be able to do to help.
Yeah, that's great. And you're hopeful of the growth of your organization and everything concerning cryonics. You're hopeful, right?
Yeah. We just had, I think last year was our fastest growth, or percentage-wise, in well over a decade, and in absolute numbers, it was biggest growth ever. We have some real challenges we're facing, but yeah, I'm pretty hopeful, and I do believe there will be kind of a phase change where people get so familiar with this idea that what will my friends think will go away, and we'll probably grow even faster. So I'm kind of prepared for faster growth, hopefully, but it's still a tiny fraction of people.
Yeah, that's okay. So finally, where can these people find you?
Well, the best way is just to go to our website, alcor.org, alcor.org. We have a contact page, we have a membership section, you can find right at the top, and huge amounts of information in the frequently asked questions. That's been building for decades, so there's a lot of information. You can subscribe to the magazine, but I would say just explore the website. That has a lot of information. Under the media section, you'll find, if you prefer watching videos to reading, there's a whole bunch of videos that I've done sort of answering common questions. So yeah, get the newsletter. We do a monthly newsletter. It's we don't bother with lots of other emails. Just say, I'd like to get Alcor news, and that will get you started. There's actually an option called associate membership, which is basically almost nothing, like $10 a month, and that gets you the newsletter and various other things. And it's kind of like a starting step. You think, well, I'm interested in this, but I'm not sure if I want to do this yet or not. So that's another option, because it's a lot simpler than becoming a full-blown member where you have to sign a bunch of contracts and make financial arrangements. But explore the website and get the newsletter, I would say, and just keep thinking about this and studying it.
Mr. Max Moore, very great pleasure, and I must say that I'm really thrilled to have you on the show, and it's been an interesting conversation so far, and I'm so pleased to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Really intelligent questions. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Augustus.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi, thanks for watching this edition of Future Discussions podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to drop it in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe so that we will be the first to get the notification whenever we drop our new videos. And if you would love to be part of Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions, the organization through which this podcast has been made available to you, please head on to our website at TAFFDs.org and you will find the process through which you can register. It's very simple. So thanks again for joining us today, and I will see you in the next edition.